Today is our last lesson on making your website more accessible to people with disabilities. So we are going to be talking about the use of different font families to make sure that your different fonts can be read on your website. So there are two types, in general, there are two types of font families, those that are called serif and those are sans serif. So serif versus sans serif is the lesson today, and when to use them, and why we can't use whatever we want all the time. So a serif font has little extra things at the end of each word that make, at the end of each letter rather, that make them look more decorative. Whereas a sans serif, and these are both French words, sans serif means that there are none of those little decorative pieces. Sans in French means without. So serif is like a decorative piece, and sans serif is without that decoration, okay? So the thing about using these fonts, and let me give you some examples of what these fonts look like. So if I'm in Google Fonts and I select serif, display, and handwriting, what ends up happening is I just get all the fonts in Google Font that are either serif or have some sort of decorative feature about them that make it look a little bit more, look a little fancier. Now these are really great fonts to use for a heading. And they're not so great fonts to use in your paragraph tags, and here is why. These little serifs, so you can see, like if I zoom in here, these fonts that have these little pieces at the end make it difficult to distinguish between when, it makes the letters actually look like they run together a little bit. So some people who have dyslexia or other learning disabilities where it's difficult to tell the end of one letter and the beginning of the next letter, these letters will often run into each other when they try to read your text. So when you have large blocks of text, like in a paragraph tag, you have at least one sentence or more, you should not be using a font that has serif on it. So all of these fonts are great to use, and they're fine to use. Serif, display, and handwriting, they are fine to use in a heading tag, but they are not okay to use in a paragraph tag because it makes it so that people cannot read your text very well, right? These are more decorative fonts. Now, if I click off these and chose sans serif and monospace, these are two types of fonts that you want to use in your paragraph tag, because the monospace are all the fonts. So let me look at just monospace fonts. Monospace are all the fonts where the distance between the letters are equally spaced. Each letter is equally spaced apart from one another. So the distance here between the letters are equally spaced, right? Mono means single space. Whereas if I include the sans serif fonts, these are fonts without any of the decorative pieces at the end. So it's much easier to read these fonts than it is the ones with the serif. So I want you to go back into your fan page, and I want you to use sans serif fonts in your paragraph tags and use serif fonts in your heading. And the reason why we wouldn't just always use sans serif, because why wouldn't we just use something that makes it readable for the entire website, is you actually want to make some of the font sort of stick out. And the way that you do that is you use more decorative font for the headings, and then the blocks of text you use the font that's easier to read, so that the headings sort of pop out to you more. So let me show you how to do this. So let's say that I want to use, in my paragraph tag, Roboto, and then I want to choose the serif and the display and the handwriting and pick one for my heading tag. So let's say I tried this for my heading tag, right? Remember, the way you can use Google Fonts is you just grab this piece, you copy it, you go to your HTML, and you paste it into the opening and closing of your head tag. So between the opening and closing of the head tag, or you place it in the head of the HTML file, between the opening and closing head tag, okay? Then you go back to Google Fonts and you grab each line individually. So this one I'm going to use, and I'm going to put it in my style sheet. I'm going to go to my paragraph tag, and I am going to paste it over what I had before. So I'm going to use Roboto. Okay, and let me see what this looks like. So for my paragraph tag, I use something that's a lot easier for me to read. This is a sans serif font, and I think I actually had, I had a sans serif font before as well. That's actually a sans serif font as well. Okay, or I could use the one that I just had, which is Roboto. Those are both sans serif. Okay, now for my heading tag, I want to use something that's a little fancier so it pops out. So I'm going to grab this piece of code right here, and in my heading tag, I'm just going to paste over what I had before. Okay, and change it so that it looks a little bit more decorative. So as I'm looking at, let me look at the entire page. As I'm looking at my website, the decorative font pops out more. But if I use the decorative font in my paragraph tag, let me show you what that would look like. You'll see that it makes it so that it's really difficult to actually read. So let me refresh this. Right, so it's really difficult for it to read because the letters are not really fully distinguishable between the letter next to it. So it makes it a lot harder to read than the font that I used to have. So you're going to go back to your fan page and you're going to make sure that all the paragraph tags, or you only style it once in the CSS, everything in your paragraph tag should be sans serif, and everything in your heading tag should have a serif on it, or a more decorative piece.